Have you ever wondered whether sign language and spoken language engage the same parts of our brain? A simple question, yet the answer lies in the complex labyrinth of our minds. Our brains, though seemingly identical, can function differently based on a myriad of factors. The question of whether signed language and spoken language stimulate the same brain systems or different ones is an intriguing puzzle. So strap in as we delve into the fascinating world of neuroscience to find the answer. To understand how our brain processes language, researchers have compared the use of signed and spoken language in bilingual individuals. An interesting case study revolves around Swedish native signers who are also proficient in spoken and written Swedish. To delve into the nuances of how our brain processes these different forms of language, the researchers used a tool called positron emission tomography, or PET scans. This ingenious method allowed them to contrast the brain's response to both Swedish Sign Language, SSL, and audio-visual spoken Swedish. The initial study found no significant differences between the brain's reaction to the two language inputs. But as science often does, it probed deeper. A subsequent study with a more detailed image analysis and a complex design discovered differences based on the language modality. The auditory cortex, nestled in the superior temporal lobe, was activated more by spoken language. On the flip side, parts of the visual cortex, specifically the posterior and inferior temporal and occipital regions, were activated more by signed language. It's like a symphony, with different sections of the orchestra playing their part depending on the piece being performed. But here's an interesting twist. The participants in this study were not just any individuals. They were hearing people who had extensive experience with both SSL and spoken and written Swedish. This led to a thought-provoking question. Could the bilingual nature of these participants have influenced the results? In other words, could these findings be unique to hearing native signers? Perhaps deaf native signers might exhibit different patterns when processing spoken language. These are the questions that help us understand the marvel that is the human brain. However, these findings may not be universally applicable. Could the bilingual nature of the participants have influenced the results? Let's find out. To address the limitations of the previous study, researchers examined deaf and hearing native signers of American Sign Language. In order to delve deeper into this intriguing matter, they utilized functional magnetic resonance imaging, commonly known as fMRI, to compare the brain activation in these individuals. Interestingly, hearing English-speaking non-signers were also part of the study, providing an additional layer of comparison. The study was designed meticulously. Participants were presented with American Sign Language phrases and nonsense gestures that bore superficial similarities to ASL. For the English-speaking non-signers, written sentences were shown one word at a time, which were then contrasted with consonant letter strings. This was done to ensure that the participants were actively processing the material, as they were required to remember what they had seen and were subsequently given a memory test at the end of the scan session. The results? Fascinating. They found that both reading English and watching ASL activated classical language regions in the left hemisphere. These findings are in line with the previous lesion data suggesting that the left parasylvian cortex is critical to language processing. However, the study didn't stop there. In both deaf and hearing native signers, there was also extensive activation in the right hemisphere, including the right parasylvian regions. This intriguing observation led researchers to speculate that the involvement of the right hemisphere was potentially due to the increased spatial processing demands of ASL grammar. In essence, the brain needs to work a bit differently to process the spatial aspects of sign language. This led to the coining of the phrase left invariance, right variability. This was used to encapsulate the finding that, in addition to the recruitment of classical left lateralized language areas, signed language processing in native ASL signers appeared to recruit the right hemisphere to a greater extent than written language processing in hearing non-signers. These findings suggest that while there is a commonality in the brain regions involved in processing signed and spoken language, there is also a unique aspect to how our brain processes sign language. So, what have we learned about how our brain engages with sign and spoken language? It appears that signed and spoken language both activate key language areas in the left hemisphere. However, sign language seems to recruit more of the right hemisphere due to its spatial processing demands. This indicates that while there are shared aspects in our brain's processing of language, there are also unique differences between signed and spoken language. While neuroscience continues to unravel the mysteries of our brain, one thing is clear: our brain's engagement with language is a complex and fascinating process.